Hello and welcome to Ecart English. In this video, we'll be looking at loan words in English. Before we go further, let us understand what loan words are. So a loan word is a word that is adopted from one language and incorporated into another language without translation. So literally this means that the word remains the same no matter which language it's been used in. Now let us have a look at how far these words exist in English. It is estimated that over 60% of all English words have Greek or Latin roots, especially in sciences and technologies. Greek words are used with high frequency and consistency. But also, there are influences from many languages in English. For instance, Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, Hindustani, and many more languages are used in English as well, which are obviously called as loan words in English. Let's begin with the most dominant language that has influenced the language of English, which is Latin. As you already know that Latin is used in scientific terminology in English, it should also be evident that Latin has influenced English in much more ways than any other language. So the first word is ambiguous, which is of Latin origin and has been used in English for many years, almost a century by now. So ambiguous means to exist in more than one form. So in more precise terms, it means to exist in two forms. So the second word is facsimile, which means duplicate or the same thing, similar things, etc. So the third one is agenda, which means a plan which is written and shown to the public. The fourth one is flux, which means to flow. And finally we have acumen, which means sharp minds or thoughts. So these are the words that came from Latin and has been used in English. Now let's have a look at the language of Greek, which has significantly contributed to English language. Here we have the words mathematics, which obviously means the science of numbers; acrobat, which means an athlete who can perform various stunts and acts. We have telephone, which is a device to communicate. Phobia is a fear of anything, or sometimes a certain fear that's been there for a very long time with a person or an individual. And finally we have the word democracy, which means the will of people or thoughts of people. Yet another language that has influenced English is French, which is the language of one of the closest countries to Britain. Some of the words that has been adopted from French is resume, which is a piece of letter or a paper that has a lot of information about you and your qualifications and other details. The second word is cafe, which is again a word derived from French, which means a coffee store in French. This word has been directly taken into English and is quite often used all over the world. The next word is brunette, which means a girl with brown hair. Quite often girls from Europe have brown hair and they are called as brunettes, especially in older times in France. And this was later adopted into English, which means the same as brown haired girl. The next word is restaurant, which also came from French. And finally we'll have village, which also came from French, and these were quite often used in countrysides of France to address remote areas and places where farming and similar activities were common. Spanish, on the other hand, has had its own influence in English language. As with French, Spanish words were also included into English. Some of the common words that you could recognize are the following, which includes Mustang, which means a horse. In fact, a feral horse that is commonly found in northern parts of United States and southern parts of America. The next word is Apache. That's the name given to the indigenous people who live in Amazon and near areas in South America. Ranch is another word that has been taken from Spanish and used in English. That means same as a farmhouse, but more to do with stables and horses. Yet another word is macho, which means a masculine or a heavily built man who stands out from the rest. Finally, we have patio, which means a small garden area where people sit and have coffee, usually in their homes or work area or office. These are not as big as a balcony, but they have chairs and tables where they can sit and have some time together. So next we have Portuguese, which is also one of the significant languages of Europe and has had good influence in English. Some of the words that's been used from Portuguese and English are monsoon, which means the rainy season, buffalo, which is an animal, banana, that's a fruit, commando, which is another name for an army personnel, and banyan, which is a big tree native to Asia. Portuguese is somewhat like Spanish and has the same pattern of usage in English as with words that's taken from these languages. And then we have German, which is also one of the most spoken languages of Europe. It's similar to Austrian, and variants of German are spoken all across Europe, and so the influence in English was just as inevitable for these loan words from German into English. So here are some of the words that's been taken from German and used in English. The first word is Blitz, which was a term used for German air invasion of Britain in the Second World War, and henceforth the word Blitz was used in English. The second word is kindergarten, which is the word which was used in Germany for children's garden, but in English it means a school for small children who are below the age of 3 or 4. Next we have rucksack, which is a bag that's used in outdoor activities, and the first reference were made to those German army personnel who used these bags to carry their personal belongings and warfare. Next is the term like flak, which means a person who gives a lot more public appearances for companies or any other activities that is not related to normal people but towards marketing kind of work. And finally we have diesel, which is a fuel that was derived from the name of the inventor who invented the diesel engine. As with a brief history, the British were in India for more than 200 years, and during this period they managed to have a lot of business and aristocratic relations with the tribal people, the princely states and other countrymen, which led them to have a lot of words being taken from Hindustani into English, and these were mostly nouns and related to things that were normally not found in the European continent in those times. The first word is loot, which means the stolen goods. This probably came from the northern parts of India, where loot meant that the goods were stolen. The second word is thug, which came from the cult thug, which were people who were considered as outcasts in India. These people were called as thuggis in India. The next word is catamaran, which means a small raft which were bound by bamboo or wood planks. But later on, what happened is every small raft came to be called as catamaran. The same goes with the next word, which is a dinghy, which is also a word that was derived from southern parts of the country. And finally we have mango, which is a fruit that was native to the country all when the British people were in India. Persian has been one of the most widely spoken language in Middle East, especially in the medieval times. So these include countries like Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, and most of those Turkish areas where Persian was prevalent as one of the most dominant languages. As a consequence of trade with these countries, there were few of those words that were included into English. For instance, Balkans came from Persian, which is the term used to define the area along the Balkan Mountains and the Bulgarian border. This peninsula is bordered by Adriatic Sea on the northwest, Ionian Sea to the southwest, and Aegean Sea in the southern hemisphere, while Black Sea borders these peninsula on the east and northeast. This peninsula has been called as Balkans, starting with the Persian people and then followed by many people around the world. The next word that came from Persian was jasmine, which is the name of a flower which is normally found in tropical areas across the world, especially in Asian countries. Now the third word is bronze, which is also of Persian origin and came from which also has some links to the Indian subcontinent, and the word bronze formulated through the years because of trade amongst the countries in Asia, and later with the countries of Europe and the United Kingdom, where English was spoken widely. The next word is brinjal, which is also a name of vegetable, and is also commonly known as eggplant in some parts of the world, but mostly they call as brinjal. And finally we have the word chapai, which is a bed-like structure commonly used to take rest or sit long in the balconies of their homes or offices, mostly in the medieval times. These words were later included in English and are now used frequently in normal conversations. The influence of Russian language and English is too visible, as with the later stages of globalization that included the end of the World War. There were a lot of words that were adopted from Russian into the English language. As the Cold War continued, there were a lot of words that were used from Russian in most of the English papers in the West, and this gave rise to a set of new words that were included in the English vocabulary. Some of the words are cosmonaut, which is the Russian version of what is an astronaut. The Tsar is equivalent of a king in Europe and other places. Sable is an animal that is found in Russia, which is also indigenous to the continent of Asia and the country of Russia. Mammoth was a large elephant-like animal that lived in Siberia, which is a region in Russia. Towards the later years, there were certain names that were included from Russian into English, like the word Kalashnikov, which was the name of the man who invented the assault rifle called AK-47, which stands for Automatic Kalashnikov 47. So the word Kalashnikov found its way to the English vocabulary as the name of an assault gun, which remains as one of the most lethal weapons of the modern times. Italian was always part of English literature, and as the years passed by, a lot of Italian words were also used in English, especially those words which were related to food and art. Some of these examples are pasta, which is kind of a dish, piano, which is a musical instrument. Opera is a stage show which includes a woman singing with an audience who listens to her. This was typically the kind of shows that was common in Italy during earlier times, and the women who performed this kind of art had high frequency sounds, and these were popular all across Italy. The next word is espresso, which is a type of coffee or blend of coffee in a certain way that became popular in Italy and was later brought into other countries as a form of beverage relating to coffee. And finally we have the word graffiti, which is relatively of a new origin and relates to the art that's drawn on streets with multitude of colors and designs. Initially these were popular in Italy, and then the craze of graffiti followed to many other countries. This later made graffiti a word in English as time followed. Chinese would have been the last of your thoughts when you would speak about languages that has influenced English. But fascinatingly, Chinese has had a lot of influence in the recent times, especially with food and different kinds of animals that were indigenous to the country of China. Incredibly, the sounds have remained the same even though the language has adopted these Chinese words. Some of the words are yin yang, which is the name of a shape that's popular in China and world over. The next word is kung fu or kung fu, which is a martial art which originated in China and is now practiced world over. The next word is ketchup, which is Chinese for tomato sauce as we call it, but mostly it's a version of tomato sauce that's called as ketchup. Now it's widely used in most of Europe and the American continent. The next word that's been used in English is kumquat, which is a fruit that belongs to China and has been popular in China for a very long time. And finally we have kowtow, which is a custom practice in China and has been followed in other countries as well, as a means to greet Chinese people or Asian people in those respective countries. The Japanese relations to English-speaking countries dates back to many centuries. Even though there were troubled relations between these countries and most of the countries who spoke English, the constant interactions and consistent trade made a lot of words from Japanese being brought into English. as with many other languages, the words that were taken as loan words from Japanese were nouns, such as kimono, which is a form of dress. The next is bonsai, which is a kind of growing culture that includes restraining plants from growing to their full and making them shorter as much as possible, sometimes into complete miniature structures. This culture was later made popular in many other countries, including Britain and many of the European countries, and the word bonsai was adopted into English language. The word anime is the next one, which is a recent addition to the English vocabulary. These were originally regarded as the cartoon characters that was made through computer programs, and as these characters became popular elsewhere across the world, the word anime was also included into the English vocabulary. And finally, we have the word tsunami, which is a natural disaster caused by flooding of seawater. The word tsunami was adopted from Japanese, where tsunamis were common all through the centuries, and finally made way to the English vocabulary. In the later years, the English explorers were also in the lands of Arabians, where Arabic was spoken widely. As a result of those interactions, there were a lot of words that were brought into English vocabulary, but also there were words that were put into English long before the English explorers even ventured into the Arabian lands. Some of the common words that we find in English that are adopted from Arabic are sherbet, which is a flavored fruit drink. These are common in Arabian countries. The next word is apricot, which is the name of a fruit, and their fruit is popular and consumed worldwide since these are processed as dry fruits and are exported all across the world. The next word is algebra, which is believed to have originated somewhere near Egypt and Arabia, but later these were adopted into mainstream mathematics, and hence these were called as algebra, thereby being adopted into English vocabulary. The next common word you find in English that belongs to Arabic is syrup, which is more like a fruit concentrate that are preserved over time. These are later used in food in forms of drinks and sweeteners. And finally, we have carob, which is a kind of edible bean that are harvested from carob tree. Since these were popular and were soon became one of the culinary essentials, the word was also included into English vocabulary. So this is all we have for you in this video. If you need to know more and listen to more such informative videos, you can visit us on www.accordenglish.com.au or write to us on info@accordenglish.com.au.